This evening is titled The Betrayer and the Beloved. And I want to read from John chapter 13, from verse 21 through to verse 30. After this is after Jesus has predicted his betrayal, Jesus was troubled in spirit and testified, "I tell you the truth, one of you is going to betray me." His disciples stared at one another, at a loss to know which one of them he meant. One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Simon Peter motioned to this disciple and said, "Ask him which one he means." Leaning back against Jesus, he asked him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is the one to whom I will give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish." And then, dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, son of Simon. As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him. "What you're about to do it quickly," Jesus told him. But no one at the meal understood why Jesus said this to him. Since Judas had charge of the money, some thought Jesus was telling him to buy what was needed for the feast, or to give something to the poor. As soon as Judas had taken the bread, he went out, and it was night. Betrayal. What does that word conjure up in your mind? Heartache? A break in trust? Soured relationship? Emotional trauma? What about psychological pain? And I'm sure we've all experienced betrayal in one way or another sometime in our life, because none of us are immune to it, because it comes as part and parcel of the fall of man. The one that started it all was when Satan betrayed Eve by twisting God's words, what God had said. Cain betrayed Abel. His sacrifice wasn't accepted by God, but Abel's sacrifice was. And so he enticed Abel out into a field, and there he killed him. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers. Delilah betrayed Samson. Saul betrayed David. And as we know, even Jesus knew what it was like to be betrayed. Somebody said, I think this was from a dictionary, betrayal is the breaking or violation of a presumptive contract, trust or confidence that produces moral and psychological conflict within a relationship. And yeah, we have all experienced it. We've been recipients of it. Maybe we've been the ones who have been giving it. The betrayal that we read of in tonight's reading of John 13 is a fulfillment of what the psalmist writes in Psalm 41 verse 9. And he writes, "Even my close friend, whom I trusted, who shared my bread, has lifted up his heel against me." They say that hindsight is an exact science. When you look back, you can always see, but you don't know what's happening ahead. Hindsight is this exact science. And for us here today, in this day and age, it's obvious that Judas was the betrayer, because we can see the events leading up. We can see what happened. But if we'd been there with Jesus and those 12, I think it would have been really difficult to know who the one was who was going to betray Jesus. Would we have picked out Judas? No, he was there with them. He was in charge of the finances. He did all the right things. There was nothing that singled him out as a black sheep. But Judas wasn't the only player in this scene. There's another person. It's not Jesus, but it's the one who goes by the title of the one whom Jesus loved. And so in tonight's passage here from John chapter 13, we have a picture of a betrayer and a beloved. A total contrast. And it's in the unspoken. It's in the silence that Jesus comes and he interrupts the narrative and he confronts us here and now. What is the difference between someone who turns away from Jesus and someone who is defined by being loved by Jesus? Think about that. What is the difference between someone who turns away from Jesus and someone who is defined by being loved by Jesus? After washing his disciples' feet, Jesus becomes troubled in his spirit about the upcoming betrayal that's going to be happening. And so he announces to the group what is going to happen so that they would know and that they would believe what was happening. And the disciples were confused by this. It seems like they quickly resumed to chatting again around the table and continuing with the meal shortly after Jesus announced it. Because typically, they always had a hard time understanding when Jesus spoke of suffering and when he spoke of dying. They always had questions about it, trying to explain it to us. What do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? But you might notice that they don't immediately assume that it's one of them who is capable of the act of betrayal. This was not because they all thought that they were equally capable of betraying Jesus. It appears like it's the opposite. There's no one here. It's not one of us. We've been with Jesus these 3 years. He trusts us. We trust him. It can't be one of us. No one thought it was Judas or any of each other, or themselves for that matter, because they all looked like real followers of Jesus. And that was based on because it was based on what they did. All of them had taken part in Jesus' ministry, and they'd spent 3 years with him, which meant they knew each other pretty well. You spend 24/7 with each other for 3 years. You know the ins and outs of people. You know what they're like. You know the good points. You know the bad points. Because of our hindsight, you think you would assume that they would automatically point to Judas and assume that, because he was the one that had the money. He was the one that dipped his hand in. He was the group treasurer. And it seems like he was sitting close enough to Jesus as well. And when somebody's sitting close to Jesus, that was considered a position of honor. The closer you were to the person, to the leader, was a thing of honor. But notice too that when Judas got up and he left the meal, it was then that the other disciples assumed the best of him. Oh no, he's probably going out. We need more food on the table. There's not enough here. He's going out to buy food. Or maybe Jesus has told him that there are some poor people outside that need to have some money. So he's going out to do that. See, the disciples overvalued what they saw from the others' outside actions. And that put them in a dangerous position, assuming that everybody was equal. Everybody was a real disciple. When one of them, his heart was far away from God. The Bible doesn't tell us concretely why Judas betrayed Jesus, but it's likely that what scholars think is that he became disillusioned with him. First, Judas's name of Iscariot means dagger men. He was literally a zealot. He was the one that was probably wanting this political revolution to overthrow the Romans. And this is the man. He's talking about, in a roundabout way, he's talking about revolution. He's talking about change. So this is the man that I must go with. Maybe he thought that Jesus was going to raise up an army. After this meal together, we're going to go out and we're going to canvass for people to join our revolution. But we also know from the text that Judas was a lover of money. And he would dip his hand into the cookie jar and take money for himself. And if Judas was disappointed with Jesus' ministry because now Jesus wasn't rising up as this revolutionary leader that he was hoping, then maybe, well, an opportunity to betray him, well, maybe then I'll put some coins in my pocket from it as well. But we also see that Judas's betrayal was influenced by the devil, who first put those thoughts into Judas's heart. And then when he got up, then he entered him. Judas seems to struggle with a transactional relationship with Jesus. And, he looked the part. He did all the right things. And at the end of the day, he was let down because Jesus didn't fulfill his side of the bargain. Distance and disillusionment with Jesus could easily lead to betrayal. How would it happen with us, doing the same sort of thing? We're disillusioned with someone. It's so easy to turn your back on them, to talk bad about them. But instead of punishing Judas, we see Jesus showing kindness. Now, he didn't announce that Judas is the betrayer to the group. He didn't make him stand up and he said, look everybody, this man that you see standing here, he's the one that's going to betray me. He didn't out him in front of the group. When Jesus dipped the bread into that bowl and handed it to Judas, that was a symbol of friendship. Not just any friendship, but a close friendship. And that shows us that Jesus viewed Judas as a friend, someone he had spent time with, someone that he had shown love to, even though he knew Judas was going to betray him. Jesus still showed him kindness right to the very end. But it's also at this time that John mentions the disciple whom Jesus loved. Now, many people think that it is John himself. It's likely true. But there are many theories as well as to why he didn't write his name down. In that time, it was common for people not to write themselves as a person into stories. They would, in a roundabout way, talk of myself as someone else. Or maybe John just wanted to attribute to God his love, the disciple whom Jesus loved. Those things may be true, but we should be cautious about jumping in to say, well, it is John. Because when you look at the disciple whom Jesus loved, you can see what John is doing. He's doing something intentionally with this character as he tells the story of Jesus. And if you read through John, the disciple whom Jesus loved is mentioned 5 times. And believe it or not, with each of those 5 times, he's either compared to or contrasted with Peter. The beloved disciple shows up in this passage, and Peter motions to him to ask Jesus. The next time is the first time that Peter denies Jesus, because Peter and the disciple whom Jesus loved follow Jesus to Pilate, or to the high priest's courtyard. The next time is at the cross, when Peter and the rest of the disciples abandon Jesus. Then there's the time at the empty tomb. Is the one who the disciple whom Jesus loved and Peter ran ahead. They went to the tomb together. Then the last time we find in John 21 where Peter is being restored by Jesus. The disciple whom Jesus loved is there as well. But what is John trying to tell us about this? What's he trying to teach us? John compares the disciple whom Jesus loved to Peter as a way to model to us as readers nowadays of the gospel that he wrote what faithful discipleship to Jesus looks like. Yes, Peter was also a beloved disciple of Jesus. But as we read the account, he was just so full of failures. He's the one that wanted to build those shelters when Jesus was transfigured up on the mountain. He was saying, oh, Master Lord, we can build a shelter for you. We can build one for Moses. We can build one for Elijah. Peter was that one that Sometimes you've got to think it's a bit stupid to step out of a boat and try and stand on water. Yes, Jesus was doing it, but he just steps out courageously onto the water. It was Peter who insisted that he would never deny Jesus. It was Peter who we heard of cut off the high priest's servant's ear when they came to arrest Jesus. He was just gung-ho. He just put himself out there in every situation. But it was also Peter who denied even knowing Jesus. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. And I'm sure we would have been just like Peter if we'd traded places. We wouldn't sit in the background the whole time. We'd be out there. We'd want to be out there. We'd want to be doing things. But God's grace made a huge impact in Peter's life by showing us that change is possible for anyone who wants to follow Jesus. And John contrasts this with the beloved disciple. Not to downplay what Peter is and who he is and the things that he's done, but rather to give us, or to have us, imagine ourselves in the story. To try and imagine ourselves as beloved by God and one that follows Christ right to the very end. Do you notice what the disciple whom Jesus loved is doing there in that upper room? He's leaning. Some translations say he's reclining on Jesus. Peter, on the other hand, is pictured a bit further away because he can't speak directly. He can't whisper into Jesus' ear. So he motions to the beloved disciple. And then Judas, well, he's just pictured as the betrayer. What do real disciples do in times of trouble, in times of distress? They're invited to draw nearer to Jesus. And instead of having as I've mentioned the word already, this transactional relationship with Jesus, we're invited to follow Jesus in a genuine love and a growing desire to be near him. Not just as an acquaintance, but as a beloved one. And it's something that follows as we obey that new commandment that Christ gave, to love like he loves. So as we look at this passage in a new way this evening, the question that comes to us, and the question that Jesus asks of us is, are you my betrayer, or are you my beloved? And how do we respond? How do we answer this truthfully? Because yes, we all have betrayed Jesus at some time or another. Whether in our thoughts or in our actions, and heaven forbid in our words. And we so want to be called beloved of Jesus. And we work hard at it. We work hard at trying to stay on the straight and narrow. But we fail dismally because we cannot do it on our own. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to do things a little differently tonight. So instead of sitting here and spending time in prayer and meditation, we're actually going to go outside. We're going to go into the garden, symbolic of the garden where Jesus was, where he prayed earnestly, where he was betrayed by Judas, where he was arrested. And take that picture in your mind. Picture that scene. Are you Judas walking towards Jesus to kiss him? Or are you the beloved, standing by Jesus, ready to go with him to stand before his accusers? How is Jesus interrupting your silence this evening? How's he interrupting the silence in your heart? So I'd like us to move out into the garden in silence. You're welcome to go, just give yourself space. Spend some time in prayer. Spend some time talking to God about this. about where you find yourself. Make things right. Make things better. Improve on what you already have. And when you're done, I'm not going to say time up or anything. When you're done, when you feel you're done, you're welcome to go home. And we'll see you tomorrow morning as we remember that final sacrifice that Jesus made for us.